Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're breaking down a sermon that tackles a really fascinating question about faith and money, one that a lot of people actually struggle with. Is it okay to be ambitious and spiritual at the same time?
So the sermon kicks off with this huge paradox. If God promises to provide for everything you need, why should you even bother striving for success or trying to build wealth? It's a tension that comes straight from one of the most famous passages in the entire Bible.
When you first read that, it sounds like a command to just chill out, right? The birds aren't working a 9 to 5, they're not investing, and yet they're taken care of. So this really gets to the heart of the conflict. Does faith mean we should just take a passive approach to our finances, or is there maybe another way to look at our role in our own success?
To really unpack the sermon's answer, we've got to go way back, like all the way back to the book of Genesis. We need to look at its definition of what the curse on labor actually is.
Now, this is super important. According to this teaching, work itself is not the curse. The problem isn't having to work. The curse is fruitless work. You know that soul-crushing feeling of putting in all the effort, working your tail off, and getting absolutely nothing to show for it? That's the curse.
And this slide just nails that concept. Imagine it. You pour all your energy into planting good seeds, expecting a great harvest, and what you get instead is a field of painful thorns. According to this sermon, that huge, frustrating gap between all your hard work and the terrible result, that's the real curse. It's a cycle of getting nowhere.
All right, so if the curse is labor that leads to nothing, then what's the flip side? Well, the sermon argues that the opposite, fruitful, rewarding work, isn't just a nice idea. It's actually presented as a biblical requirement.
And this verse? It's a pretty direct counter-argument to anyone who thinks faith is all about being idle. It doesn't get much clearer than that, right? The message here is that work is a fundamental responsibility, and it's tied directly to our provision.
This is where the whole perspective really shifts. See, instead of work being this terrible burden we have to endure, this teaching frames it as a potential source of joy, a gift from God. So, okay, if we're supposed to work, the big question is, how do we do it in a way that actually leads to a reward? How do we break that curse?
Okay, this is where we get to the heart of it. The sermon lays out this really practical 7-step framework for how to turn your work into a real reward and finally break that cycle of fruitless effort.
So here it is. This is the roadmap for what the sermon calls blessed labor. And what's cool is that it's a whole journey. It starts with your mindset, moves into your actual actions, and then ends with gratitude. It's not just about working harder, it's the whole shebang. Let's dive into what each of these means.
So the whole thing kicks off with your inner game. First, it's all about intention. Before you even start a task, you dedicate it to God. Then, principle 2 is about how you execute. You work with your tan man, which is just a way of saying your whole being, your mind, your body, everything. You pour your full self into it, like you're doing it for God, not just for your boss.
Okay, next up, the focus moves to your character. Principle 3 is all about integrity, not copying the shady things other people might be doing at work. And principle 4 is about not stealing, but it's broader than you think. The sermon says you can actually steal time by showing up late, slacking off, or taking those extra long breaks.
And get this slide really boils it down to a simple cause and effect. A slack hand leads to poverty, a diligent hand brings wealth. It's that direct. In this view, diligence isn't just some nice-to-have virtue, it's literally the engine that creates prosperity.
And these next two principles are all about discipline. First, focus on one thing at a time. Finish what you're doing in the field before you go start building your house. Basically, no multitasking. And second, be diligent. The sermon comes back to this idea over and over. Laziness leads to poverty, period. Hard work leads to increase.
So, let's put it all together. You've applied these principles. You've set your intention. You've acted with character. You've been disciplined. The sermon's point is that now your work is expected to be fruitful. The reward isn't just a bonus. It's a core part of the whole process. And this really pushes back on that idea you sometimes hear, work hard and expect nothing. In this framework, that's not the goal at all. The reward, whether it's a paycheck, a promotion, or even a good grade, isn't some lucky break. It's the intended, rightful end of the cycle.
And this is a big but, the process isn't over when you get the reward. It doesn't stop with the paycheck hitting your account.
there is one final, absolutely critical step that brings the entire thing full circle and gives it all its meaning.
The cycle doesn't end with getting, it ends with giving. Giving thanks, that is. So yeah, step 1 is to receive that reward and enjoy it. You earned it. But the final and most important step is to remember where that success came from and to give the credit back to God. That's what closes the loop.
And the sermon has a huge warning here about what it calls the success trap. That's when you get the reward and your ego kicks in and you start thinking, yeah, look what I did. Forgetting the source, in this view, is the first step toward a downfall. It's what breaks that whole cycle of blessing.
And that brings us to the core message. Work, when you look at it this way, is totally transformed. It stops being just a 9-to-5 grind to pay the bills. It becomes this incredible, continuous cycle of worship. You start with dedication, you move through hard, honest work that leads to a real reward, and you close it all out with gratitude, which then fuels your dedication to start the whole cycle over again. It really leaves us with a powerful question to think about, doesn't it? How different would our work lives be if the ultimate goal wasn't just the paycheck, but the praise,